The stagecoach wheels groaned to a halt outside the general store in Breckenridge, Colorado, and Xavier Lancaster watched a woman descend wearing black silk that seemed to swallow the afternoon sunlight of 1876. Her mourning veil so thick he could barely see the pale oval of her face beneath it. He had been waiting 3 months for this moment, ever since he had sent his photograph and letter east through the matrimonial agency, ever since he had received her carefully penned response agreeing to become his wife. The advertisement had promised companionship, not love, and he had been honest about his cattle ranch 20 miles outside town, about the hard work and the loneliness of the Colorado mountains. But nothing in her letters had mentioned death, and the black dress that rustled as she stepped down from the coach spoke louder than any words could have. Xavier removed his hat, his sun-weathered hands gripping the brim as he approached her. He was 28 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of Colorado sky. The woman who turned toward him stood perfectly still, her gloved hands clasped before her, and he could feel the weight of grief radiating from her like heat from summer stones. "Miss Penelope Zimmerman." His voice came out rougher than he intended, nerves making his throat tight. "Yes." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but he heard the East Coast refinement in it, the careful diction that spoke of education and a life very different from the one she was walking into. "You must be Mr. Lancaster. Xavier, please." He gestured toward the boarding house across the dusty street. "I have a room arranged for you at Mrs. Patterson's. We can talk there if you would like, or I can give you time to rest from your journey." She tilted her head, and he caught a glimpse of dark eyes behind the veil, red-rimmed and exhausted. "I would prefer to speak now if that suits you." The boarding house parlor was empty at this hour, most residents out working or shopping. Mrs. Patterson, a kindly widow with silver hair, brought them coffee and disappeared with understanding written across her weathered face. Xavier sat across from Penelope, watching as she lifted her veil with trembling fingers and tucked it back over the brim of her small black hat. She was beautiful in the way of broken things, her face all sharp angles and pale skin, her dark hair pulled back so severely it must have hurt. Her eyes were the deep brown of rich earth, and they held an ocean of pain that made Xavier's chest tighten with sympathy. "My sister died 6 weeks ago," Penelope said without preamble, her fingers wrapped around the coffee cup as though drawing warmth from it despite the summer heat. "She was my only family. Cholera took her in 3 days." Xavier nodded slowly, setting down his own cup. "I am deeply sorry for your loss. I was already committed to coming here when it happened." Her voice remained steady, but he saw her knuckles whiten on the cup. "I had sold everything I owned to pay for the journey. There was nothing left in Philadelphia for me, and nowhere else to go. I know this is not what you expected. I know a bride in mourning is not what any man wants." He looked at her for a long moment, taking in the rigid way she held herself, the determination that kept her spine straight despite the grief that clearly threatened to consume her. This woman had traveled 2,000 miles alone in mourning, with no guarantee of what she would find at the end. That took courage that demanded respect. "I want to be clear about something," Xavier said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I will wait until you are ready. For the marriage, for everything. I will not rush you or pressure you. You can stay at Mrs. Patterson's as long as you need, and I will pay for your room and board. When you are ready, if you are ready, we can talk about the future." Penelope stared at him, and for the first time since she had stepped off that stagecoach, something other than grief flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps. Relief. Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked away quickly, her jaw clenching. "That is very kind," she managed. More than kind. I do not know what to say. You do not need to say anything. Xavier stood, replacing his hat. Rest today. Tomorrow, if you are feeling up to it, I will show you the town. You should know what you are getting yourself into before you make any decisions. He left her there, sitting in that parlor in her mourning black, and rode back to his ranch with the image of her grief-stricken face burned into his mind. He had expected nervousness, perhaps homesickness, maybe even some disappointment when she saw him in person. But this raw, fresh grief was something else entirely, and it changed everything. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the Colorado mountains standing sharp against the sky. Xavier rode into town early, stopping at the general store to pick up supplies before heading to the boarding house. He found Penelope in the dining room, still dressed in black but with her veil lifted, eating breakfast with the careful movements of someone going through familiar motions without really tasting anything. "Good morning," he said from the doorway, and she looked up with those dark eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Lancaster." "Xavier," he corrected gently. "May I join you?" She nodded, and he sat across from her, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Patterson. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Penelope set down her fork and looked at him directly. "You said you would show me the town today. If you are up for it, yes." He studied her face, looking for signs of exhaustion. "There is no rush. I would like to see it." She smoothed her black skirts, a nervous gesture. "I have been sitting still for too long, on the train, in the stagecoach. I think I need to move." Xavier understood that. Grief could trap you in stillness, make you feel like you were drowning in air. Movement helped sometimes. Work helped. He had learned that after his parents died in a winter storm 5 years ago, leaving him the ranch, and a hollow feeling in his chest that had taken months to ease. They walked the length of Breckenridge's Main Street, Xavier pointing out the important buildings. The general store owned by Harold Chen, whose parents had come from China to work the mines and had stayed to build a business. The church where Reverend Thompson preached every Sunday and Wednesday. The saloon that Xavier admitted he rarely visited, preferring quiet evenings at home. The small schoolhouse where Miss Sarah Williams taught children of all ages in one crowded room. Penelope listened intently, asking questions in that quiet voice of hers. How many people lived in town? About 300, he told her, with many more in the surrounding ranches and mining camps. Was there a library? A small one in the church basement, mostly donated books. Did the town have a doctor? Yes, Dr. Marcus Webb, an older gentleman who had come west after the war and settled here with his wife. As they walked, Xavier noticed the way people looked at them. Some nodded politely. Others whispered behind their hands, curiosity plain on their faces. Breckenridge was a small town, and the arrival of a mail-order bride was news. The fact that she wore mourning black only added to the intrigue. "They are staring," Penelope murmured, her shoulders tensing. "Small town," Xavier said simply. "Everyone knows everyone else's business, or thinks they do. They will get used to you soon enough." They stopped at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to meadows and the mountains rose in the distance, purple and gray and magnificent. Penelope stood looking at them for a long time, and Xavier watched her profile, the way the wind tugged at her veil. "It is beautiful here," she said finally. "Very different from Philadelphia. Do you miss it?" "The city," she was quiet for a moment. "I miss my sister. Everything else feels like it belonged to someone else's life." Xavier wanted to say something comforting, but words felt inadequate against the weight of her loss. Instead, he simply stood beside her, letting the silence stretch between them, and after a while she turned back toward town. Over the next 2 weeks, Xavier established a routine. He would ride into town most afternoons, checking to see if Penelope needed anything, sometimes bringing her small gifts. A book he thought she might enjoy, fresh vegetables from his garden. Once, a handful of wildflowers that he immediately felt foolish about, but she had taken them with something like a smile and put them in a jar of water in her room. He did not push, did not ask about marriage or the future. He simply showed up, steady and patient, and slowly Penelope began to relax around him. They took walks together, exploring the paths around Breckenridge. She told him about her life in Philadelphia, about growing up in a small apartment above a tailor's shop, about her sister Emma, who had been 3 years younger and full of laughter. Xavier told her about the ranch, about his parents who had built it from nothing, about the cattle and horses that were his responsibility now. "You get lonely out there?" Penelope asked one afternoon as they sat by the creek that ran east of town, watching the water rush over smooth stones. Xavier considered the question. "Sometimes, but the work keeps me busy and I have 2 ranch hands who help during the busy seasons. It is not a bad life, just a quiet one." "I think I might like quiet," she said softly. "I have had enough of noise and crowds." 3 weeks after her arrival, Penelope appeared at breakfast without her veil. It was a small thing, but Xavier felt his breath catch at the sight of her face fully visible in the morning light. She was still pale, still had shadows under her eyes, but there was something different about the way she held herself. A little less rigidity, perhaps. A little less of that desperate grief. "I was thinking," she said as they walked toward the general store later that morning, "that perhaps I should find some work. I cannot simply sit in that boarding house forever, and you should not have to pay for my keep indefinitely." Xavier frowned. "I do not mind paying for your room. I mind." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "I mind being a burden. I mind feeling useless. In Philadelphia, I worked as a seamstress. I am good with a needle. Perhaps someone in town needs help." He respected her for that, for wanting to contribute rather than simply accept charity. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned she has been looking for someone to help with mending and alterations. She takes in work from people in town but has more than she can handle alone." Penelope's face brightened, the first real expression of interest he had seen from her. "You think she would let me help?" "I think she would be grateful for it." By that afternoon, Penelope was installed in Mrs. Patterson's sewing room, her capable fingers flying through a pile of shirts that needed mending. Xavier watched her work for a few minutes before heading back to his ranch, and he saw how the work focused her, gave her somewhere to put her energy other than grief. August melted into September, and the aspens began to turn gold on the mountainsides. Penelope slowly became part of the fabric of Breckenridge, known at the general store and the church, respected for her skill with a needle and her quiet demeanor. She still wore black, but she had set aside the heavy veil except for Sundays, and Xavier thought he caught glimpses of the woman she must have been before loss changed her. They continued their walks, their conversations growing longer and more comfortable. She asked about the ranch, about what it would be like to live there, and he answered honestly. It was isolated, especially in winter when snow could make the journey to town difficult. It was hard work, endless chores and constant vigilance against predators and illness in the herd. But it was also beautiful, with views that took your breath away and a peace that seeped into your bones. "I would like to see it," Penelope said one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun paint the mountains orange and pink. "The ranch, I mean." "If the invitation is still open." Xavier looked at her in surprise. "Of course it is, whenever you want." "Tomorrow." She met his gaze, and he saw nervousness there, but also determination. "I think I am ready to see what my future might look like." The ride to the ranch took just under 2 hours, following a well-worn trail through meadows and along ridgelines. Penelope rode a gentle mare that Xavier had borrowed from the livery stable, sitting in the saddle with the careful posture of someone who had not ridden much, but was determined to do it correctly. He kept his own horse at an easy pace, pointing out landmarks along the way. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, and Xavier felt the familiar surge of pride and responsibility that always hit him at this sight. The house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and stone chimney. The barn stood solid and red behind it, and beyond that were the corrals and pastures where his cattle grazed. Mountains rose on three sides, creating a natural amphitheater that sheltered the valley from the worst of the wind. Penelope reined in her horse, staring at the scene before them. Xavier watched her face, trying to gauge her reaction. "It is beautiful," she said finally, and her voice held genuine wonder. "You built this." "My parents built most of it. I have added some, made repairs. It is a work in progress." They rode down into the valley and Xavier showed her around. The barn with its neat rows of stalls and the loft full of hay. The chicken coop where his hens clucked and fussed. The vegetable garden, smaller now as autumn approached but still producing. The house itself, simple and clean, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living space, 2 bedrooms, and a loft where his ranch hands slept when they stayed over during busy seasons. Penelope moved through the rooms slowly, taking everything in. She paused at the window in the main room, looking out at the view of the mountains. Xavier stood behind her, close enough to smell the faint lavender scent of her soap. "I could be happy here," she said quietly, almost to herself. Then she turned to face him, and her dark eyes were serious. "Xavier, I need to be honest with you about something." His heart beat faster. "All right. When I agreed to come west to marry you, I thought I was doing it out of desperation. I had no money, no prospects, no family. You seemed kind in your letters, and that was more than I had any right to expect. But I did not come here with any illusions about love." Xavier nodded slowly. "I understood that. I was not looking for a love match either, just companionship, a partner." "Yes." She clasped her hands in front of her, that nervous gesture he had come to recognize. "But these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your patience and your kindness, the way you have waited without complaint or pressure, it has changed things for me. I think I could come to care for you deeply, given time. I think I might already be starting to." The words hit him with unexpected force because they echoed feelings he had been trying not to examine too closely. Somewhere between her arrival in that stagecoach and now, his interest in her had shifted from duty to something warmer, something that made his chest ache when he thought about her smile. "I am glad," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I find myself thinking about you constantly. Wondering if you are well, if you need anything, if I might see you smile. I did not expect this either, but I am not sorry for it." Penelope stepped closer, and he could see the pulse beating at her throat, the way her breath had quickened. "I am still in mourning. It would not be proper to marry yet. But I do not want to wait forever, and I do not want to keep taking up space in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house when there is a place here I could be useful." Xavier understood what she was suggesting, and he shook his head gently. "I will not have people talking about you, saying unkind things. Your reputation matters. My reputation is that of a mail-order bride in mourning black. People are already talking." She lifted her chin stubbornly. "But if it makes you uncomfortable, I will wait. I simply wanted you to know that I am ready to start building a life when you are ready to have me." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were small and cold, and they trembled slightly in his grasp. "Give me 2 weeks. I will speak to Reverend Thompson, arrange everything properly. We will do this right." 2 weeks, she agreed, and the smile that crossed her face was like sunrise, tentative but full of promise. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Xavier cleaned the house from top to bottom, made repairs he had been putting off, bought new curtains for the bedroom windows. Penelope sewed herself a gray dress, the first step out of full mourning, and helped Mrs. Patterson make a simple cake for the small reception they would have after the ceremony. Word spread through Breckenridge, and opinions were mixed. Some people thought it was too soon, that Penelope should wait at least a year before remarrying. Others, particularly the women who had met her and liked her quiet strength, thought it was practical and sensible. Xavier ignored all of it, focusing instead on making sure everything was perfect. On a cool September morning with the aspens blazing gold on the mountains, Xavier Lancaster married Penelope Zimmerman in the small church in Breckenridge. She wore her gray dress and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. He wore his best suit and could not stop looking at her as Reverend Thompson spoke the words that bound them together. "I do," she said when asked, her voice clear and steady. "I do," he echoed and meant it with his whole heart. The reception at the boarding house was small but cheerful, attended by Mrs. Patterson and a handful of townspeople who had befriended Penelope over the past months. Xavier and Penelope cut the cake together, their hands touching on the knife, and he felt the warmth of her shoulder against his arm. When they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. Penelope looked at the house as they approached, and Xavier saw no fear in her face, only a quiet contentment. Inside, he showed her to the bedroom that was now theirs. He had put fresh linens on the bed, hung the new curtains, placed a vase of flowers on the dresser. Penelope set down her small bag and turned to him, and in the golden light filtering through the windows, she looked ethereal and beautiful and slightly terrified. "I know I said I was ready," she began, "but I think I am more nervous than I expected to be." Xavier stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "We do not have to rush anything. I meant what I said when you first arrived. I will wait until you are ready." She looked up at him, searching his face. "I am your wife now. You have been patient for so long. I do not want to disappoint you. You could never disappoint me." He lifted one hand to cup her cheek gently, feeling her lean into the touch. "Penelope, I care about you more than I can easily say. I want this to be right for both of us, not just obligation." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I want to try. I want to be a proper wife to you. I am just afraid I will not know how." Xavier kissed her forehead softly, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair. "Then we will learn together." He kissed her then, properly, his lips finding hers with a tenderness that made her sigh against his mouth. She tasted of cake and possibility, and when her arms came up to circle his neck, he felt something in his chest unlock and expand. They moved slowly, carefully, learning the shape and feel of each other. He unlaced her dress with fumbling fingers while she unbuttoned his shirt with hands that shook slightly. Each piece of clothing that fell away revealed more vulnerability, more trust, until they stood before each other with nothing hidden. The evening light painted them in gold as they came together in the marriage bed, and what Xavier had expected to be merely physical became something profound. She gasped his name, and he murmured endearments against her skin, and when it was over they lay tangled together with her head on his chest and his hand stroking her hair. "That was not disappointing at all," she whispered, and he felt her smile against his skin. "No," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "Not at all." Autumn deepened into winter, and Penelope settled into life on the ranch with a determination that impressed Xavier daily. She learned to care for the chickens, to churn butter, to bake bread in the temperamental stove. She helped him with ranch accounts, her neat handwriting filling the ledgers with income and expenses. She sewed curtains for every window and made cushions for the chairs, and transformed the house into a home. The first snow came in late October, dusting the mountains white and making the valley shimmer. Penelope stood on the porch wrapped in one of Xavier's coats, watching the flakes fall, and he came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Are you warm enough?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "With you, always." She leaned back against him. "Xavier, I need to tell you something." His heart jumped. "What is it?" "I have not had my monthly courses in 6 weeks. I think I might be with child." Xavier turned her in his arms, searching her face. She looked nervous but also pleased, a soft glow in her cheeks that might have been from the cold or might have been something else. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but the signs are there. I thought I should tell you before I saw Dr. Webb to confirm it." Joy surged through him, pure and bright, and he kissed her soundly. "That is wonderful news, the best news. You are happy then? I know we have only been married a short time." "I am more than happy. I am thrilled." He pressed his forehead to hers, his hands gentle on her waist. "Are you happy about it?" "Yes," she said, and her smile was radiant. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again after Emma died. But you have given me hope, Xavier. You have given me a future." Dr. Webb confirmed the pregnancy a week later, predicting a late spring or early summer birth. Xavier fussed over Penelope constantly, insisting she rest more, worry less, let him handle the heavier chores. She tolerated his concern with amused patience, pointing out that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was perfectly capable of maintaining her normal routine for months yet. Winter closed in around the ranch with characteristic Colorado intensity. Snow piled high against the barn walls, and the cattle huddled in the shelter of the valley. Xavier and his 2 ranch hands, Tom and Peter, worked long days keeping the animals fed and the paths clear. Penelope kept the house warm and the meals hot, and Xavier treasured the evenings when they sat by the fire, her sewing in her lap and his accounts on the table, comfortable in each other's presence. Christmas came, and they celebrated alone at the ranch, the journey to town too difficult with snow blocking the main trail. Penelope gave Xavier a new shirt she had sewn, the stitching so fine it looked like machine work. He gave her a music box he had ordered from Denver months ago, tiny and delicate, that played a waltz when you opened the lid. "It is beautiful," she breathed, watching the mechanism turn. "How did you know I loved music?" "You hum when you sew," he said simply. "And you have a smile on your face when you do it. I thought you might like this." She set the music box carefully aside and kissed him with a passion that still surprised him sometimes. This woman who had arrived in mourning black and had slowly bloomed into color. They made love in front of the fire that night, slow and tender, her body already beginning to change with the life growing inside her. Winter released its grip gradually. Snow melting into rushing streams, meadows emerging green and dotted with wildflowers. Penelope's belly swelled round and firm, and Xavier loved to rest his hand there and feel the baby kick. She glowed with health and happiness, so different from the grief-stricken woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 9 months ago. In late May, on a morning when the air smelled of pine and warming earth, Penelope's labor began. Xavier rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch Dr. Webb while Mrs. Patterson, who had come to stay the week specifically for this purpose, helped Penelope through the early stages. The ride back to the ranch was the longest of Xavier's life, terror and excitement warring in his chest. The labor lasted through the day and into the evening, Penelope's cries echoing through the house and tearing at Xavier's heart. He stayed with her as much as Dr. Webb and Mrs. Patterson would allow, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her face, murmuring encouragement. "I cannot do this," she gasped at one point, her face pale and exhausted. "You can," he insisted. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this." And she did. As the sun set beyond the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that made Xavier's eyes fill with tears. "Doctor." Webb cleaned the baby and handed him to Penelope, who cradled him against her chest with wonder written across her exhausted face. "He is perfect," she whispered. "Look at him, Xavier. He is perfect." Xavier looked at his son, at this tiny person with a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, and felt his world shift and expand. "He is, just like his mother." They named him Elijah Thomas Lancaster, after Xavier's father and Tom, the ranch hand who had worked for Xavier since the beginning. The baby was healthy and strong, and Penelope recovered well from the birth. Xavier marveled at how naturally motherhood came to her, the way she soothed Elijah's cries and nursed him with patient tenderness. Summer passed in a haze of new parenthood. Sleepless nights and tiny milestones and the exhaustion that came with caring for an infant. But also joy, so much joy that Xavier sometimes felt he could not contain it all. Penelope singing lullabies while she rocked Elijah. The baby's first smile, aimed at his mother's face. The warm weight of his son sleeping on Xavier's chest while Penelope napped nearby. They made a trip to town in late August for Elijah's blessing at the church. Reverend Thompson held the baby carefully, speaking words of prayer and hope, and the congregation gathered around to welcome the newest member of their community. Afterward, at the reception in the church hall, Xavier stood with Penelope and watched people coo over their son. "We have come a long way from that day you arrived," Xavier murmured, his arm around his wife's waist. Penelope looked up at him, and the love in her eyes still had the power to stop his breath. "We have. I never imagined I could be this happy, especially not after Emma died. But you waited for me, Xavier. You gave me time to heal, and you made me feel safe enough to love again." "I would wait forever for you," he said simply. "Though I am grateful I did not have to." She laughed, the sound bright and joyful, and kissed him there in front of half the town. Let them talk. Let them whisper. He had his family, his wife, his son, and his ranch. He had everything he needed. As the years passed, the Lancaster ranch prospered. Xavier expanded his herd, built a new barn, hired additional ranch hands during the busy seasons. Penelope continued her sewing work, taking commissions from women in Breckenridge, and sometimes as far away as Denver. She found she had a talent for designing wedding dresses, and her creations became sought after throughout the region. Elijah grew into a rambunctious toddler, and then a curious little boy, trailing after his father around the ranch, asking endless questions about the cattle and horses and everything else he encountered. Xavier taught him to ride when he was 4, setting him on the gentlest mare and walking beside him until he found his balance. Penelope watched from the porch, one hand shading her eyes, the other resting on her belly where their second child grew. Their daughter, Rosalie Emma Lancaster, named for Xavier's mother and Penelope's lost sister, was born on a snowy December morning. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and from the beginning she was quieter than Elijah had been, content to watch the world with solemn attention. 2 years later came another son, Samuel, who had his father's height even as a baby and a sunny disposition that made everyone around him smile. The house that had once felt empty now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Xavier hired a tutor from town to come 3 times a week to teach the children their letters and numbers, unwilling to send them away to boarding school the way some ranchers did. Penelope supplemented the lessons with her own teaching, reading to them every night from the growing collection of books in their parlor. One evening, when Elijah was 8 and Rosalie 6 and Samuel 4. Xavier sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Penelope came out and settled beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder in the familiar gesture of companionship that had sustained them through the years. "You ever think about how different your life would be if I had not gotten on that stagecoach?" she asked quietly. Xavier considered the question. "I think about it sometimes. I would have the ranch still, probably, but the house would be empty. No children's voices, no you. I cannot imagine going back to that loneliness now." "Neither can I." She lifted her head to look at him. "You know, when Emma died, I thought my life was over. I got on that stagecoach because I had no other choice, not because I had any hope left. But you gave me hope, Xavier. You waited for me when you could have sent me away. You saw past the grief to the person I could be again." He kissed her temple gently. "You did the work of healing yourself. I just provided a safe place for it to happen." "We healed each other," she corrected. "You were lonely too, even if you did not want to admit it. We built this life together." The door burst open, and Elijah tumbled out, followed by Rosalie and then Samuel, all three children talking over each other about something urgent that had happened in the house. Xavier and Penelope looked at each other and laughed, the moment of quiet reflection shattered but not regretted. This was their life now, loud and messy and full, and neither of them would change it for anything. The children grew, as children do. Elijah became a skilled horseman and showed interest in running the ranch someday. Rosalie displayed a talent for drawing and filled notebooks with sketches of the mountains and animals around them. Samuel had his mother's way with a needle and often sat with her in the sewing room, learning stitches and patterns with patient concentration. Xavier and Penelope grew too, not apart but deeper into each other. They knew each other's moods and needs without words. They fought occasionally, as all couples do, about money or discipline or how to handle a particular situation, but they always worked through it. The foundation they had built on patience and respect and genuine affection proved strong enough to weather the storms. When Penelope was 35, she confessed to Xavier that she was tired in a way that worried her. He insisted she see Dr. Webb, fear tight in his chest. The doctor examined her and declared she was simply run down from years of mothering 3 active children while also maintaining her sewing business. He prescribed more rest and perhaps help around the house. Xavier hired a local girl, Margaret, to come in several days a week to help with cooking and cleaning. Penelope protested at first, insisting she could manage, but Xavier was firm. "You have been taking care of everyone else for 10 years. Let someone take care of you for a change." With the extra help, Penelope's energy returned. She spent more time on her sewing, creating elaborate dresses that were shipped across Colorado and beyond. She also began teaching a sewing class in town one afternoon a week, passing on her skills to younger women. Xavier loved watching her in her element, confident and skilled, so different from the uncertain woman in mourning black who had once been afraid of everything. The years continued their steady march. Elijah turned 16, then 18, a man now in all but name. He had his father's height and his mother's dark eyes, and Xavier watched with pride as his son took on more responsibility around the ranch. Rosalie at 16 was beautiful and talented, her drawings now good enough that she had sold several to visitors passing through Breckenridge. Samuel at 14 was already as tall as his mother, gentle and artistic, helping her with increasingly complex sewing projects. Xavier found himself in his late 40s, his dark hair now threaded with silver, his body still strong from ranch work but beginning to feel the accumulation of years. He looked at Penelope across the dinner table one evening, watched the lamplight catch in her hair, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it made his chest ache. After the children had gone to bed, he pulled her into his arms in their bedroom, holding her close. "I love you," he said simply. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I can express." She looked up at him, her face still beautiful despite the lines time had etched around her eyes and mouth. "I know. I feel it every day in 1,000 small ways, and I love you just as much." They made love with the comfortable passion of long familiarity, knowing exactly how to please each other. The fire between them banked, but not extinguished by time. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Xavier thought about the stagecoach that had arrived that summer day so long ago, about the woman in mourning black and his impulsive promise to wait. He had not known then what he was promising, how waiting would turn into loving, how loving would turn into this rich, full life. But he would not change a moment of it. The summer Elijah turned 21, he married a local girl named Catherine, a rancher's daughter with a practical nature and a genuine love for ranch life. The wedding was held at the Lancaster Ranch, with half of Breckenridge in attendance. Penelope had made Catherine's wedding dress, a masterpiece of silk and lace that made the bride look like something from a fairy tale. Xavier gave the couple a section of his land to build their own house on, wanting to keep his son close, but also give him independence. Within a year, Catherine was pregnant with Xavier and Penelope's first grandchild. The cycle continued, generations building on what had come before. Rosalie fell in love with a traveling artist who came through Breckenridge one summer. Marcus was from Boston, sophisticated and educated, and Xavier worried at first that he would take his daughter away. But Marcus loved the mountains as much as Rosalie did, and he agreed to split their time between Colorado and the East Coast, allowing Rosalie to maintain her connections to her family while also pursuing her art career in larger cities. Samuel, to everyone's surprise including his own, fell in love with Margaret, the hired help who had become part of the family over the years. She was 3 years older than him, a widow whose husband had died in a mining accident, and she brought a steadiness that complemented Samuel's artistic nature. Their wedding was smaller than Elijah's, held in the church with close family and friends, but no less joyful. Xavier stood on his porch one evening, 53 years old now, watching his grandchildren play in the yard. Elijah's son William, age 5, chased after his younger sister Grace while Catherine watched from a blanket spread on the grass. In the house behind him, he could hear Penelope laughing at something Samuel's wife said, could smell the bread baking for dinner. This was what he had wanted, he realized. Though he had not known it clearly that day, he sent his letter to the matrimonial agency. Not just a wife to keep his house, but a partner to build a life with. Not just children to pass the ranch to, but a family full of love and laughter. Not just survival, but joy. Penelope came out to join him, sliding her hand into his with the ease of long practice. Her hair was more silver than dark now, her face lined from years of smiling, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Thinking deep thoughts, she teased gently. Just grateful, he said. For you, for this, for everything we have built together. The stagecoach widow and the patient cowboy, she said, referencing the way people in town sometimes referred to their story. Who would have thought we would turn out so well? I did, Xavier said firmly. From the moment I saw you step down in that mourning black, grieving and brave and determined, I thought you were the strongest person I had ever met. I knew if you gave me a chance, we could build something worth having. Penelope turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You waited for me to be ready. That changed everything. You gave me the space to heal, the time to remember who I was beyond grief. Not many men would have done that. "I would do it again," he said simply. "1,000 times over I would wait for you." She kissed him there on the porch with their grandchildren playing nearby and the mountains standing eternal in the background. It was not the passionate, desperate kiss of new lovers, but something deeper and more lasting. It was the kiss of two people who had walked through years together, who had faced hardships and celebrated joys, who had built a life brick by brick, until they had created something that would outlast them both. The years continued to pass, as they always do. Xavier and Penelope grew older, their hair turning fully silver, their movements slower but no less purposeful. They handed over more of the ranch operations to Elijah while maintaining their place at the heart of the family. Grandchildren multiplied, filling the house with noise and energy during visits. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by 3 generations of hands. Children ran and played while adults talked and laughed. As the sun began to set, Xavier stood to speak, Penelope beside him. 25 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the gathering, a woman in mourning black stepped off a stagecoach in Breckenridge. She had traveled 2,000 miles alone, grieving her sister, with nothing but courage and determination to sustain her. I made her a promise that day. I told her I would wait until she was ready, that I would not rush or pressure her. It was the best promise I ever made. He turned to look at Penelope, his hand finding hers. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed. A home full of love, children and grandchildren who are the best of both of us. A partnership that has sustained me through every challenge. I would wait another lifetime if that is what it took to have you by my side." Penelope was crying now, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You saw me when I could not see myself. You believed in me when I had no belief left. You taught me that grief does not have to be the end of the story, that there can be joy and love and life after loss. I am more grateful than I can ever express that I got on that stagecoach, that I found you waiting." Their children and grandchildren cheered, and someone started playing music on a fiddle. Xavier led Penelope in a dance there in the yard, their movements slow but still graceful, still full of the love that had sustained them through a quarter-century together. As they danced, Penelope whispered in his ear, "Thank you for waiting." "Thank you for being worth the wait," he whispered back. The stars came out above them, brilliant in the clear Colorado sky. The mountains stood dark and eternal against the horizon. The ranch, built by Xavier's parents and expanded by Xavier himself, and soon to be passed to another generation, represented more than just land and cattle. It represented continuity, family, love that endured. Xavier held his wife close and thought about all the things he had learned in 54 years of life. That patience was a virtue that paid dividends beyond measure. That real love was not about instant passion, but about showing up every day, through grief and joy, through challenges and celebrations. That the best things in life were worth waiting for. That sometimes a woman in mourning black and a cowboy willing to wait could build something that lasted forever. They danced until the moon rose, surrounded by family, wrapped in love, grateful for every moment that had led them to this place. And in the morning, they would wake in their bed, would begin another day on the ranch, would continue building the life they had created together. But for now, in this moment, they simply held each other and danced. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way, and who had never once regretted the journey. The music played on, the stars wheeled overhead, and Xavier Lancaster held his wife and knew that he was the richest man in Colorado, not because of land or cattle, but because 25 years ago he had made a promise and kept it. He had waited for Penelope to be ready, and in waiting, he had found everything he had ever wanted. Years later, when Xavier was 63 and Penelope 60, they took a trip back to Philadelphia. It was her first time returning since she had left so many years ago, and Xavier could see the emotions playing across her face as they traveled east by train. The country had changed dramatically since her original journey. Railroads crisscrossed the nation now, making the trip a matter of days rather than weeks. Philadelphia was enormous and overwhelming after decades in Colorado. Buildings rose tall and crowded. People rushed everywhere. Noise assaulted them from all directions. But Penelope navigated the streets with growing confidence, pointing out landmarks from her childhood. She took Xavier to the tailor shop where she had grown up, now run by a different family. The apartment above it where she and Emma had shared a bed and dreams was occupied by strangers. They visited Emma's grave in a cemetery on the outskirts of the city, and Penelope laid flowers on the headstone while Xavier stood respectfully behind her. "I wanted you to meet him," Penelope said softly to the grave. "My Xavier. The man who waited for me, who gave me a life I never imagined I could have. I wish you could have known him, Emma. I wish you could have seen the children, the ranch, everything we built. I miss you still, but the grief does not consume me anymore. He helped me find my way through it." Xavier put his hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. When she turned into his embrace, he held her while she cried, these tears different from the ones she had shed so long ago. These were tears of remembrance rather than raw grief, of love that endured even beyond death. They spent a week in Philadelphia, visiting museums and theaters, experiencing the culture that Penelope had given up when she traveled west. But by the end of the week, Xavier could see she was ready to go home. Colorado had claimed her completely, the mountains and open spaces more home now than these crowded city streets. On the train back west, Penelope leaned against Xavier's shoulder and watched the landscape change through the window. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said quietly. "I needed to face those memories to say goodbye properly." "Are you all right?" Xavier asked, his arm around her shoulders. "More than all right. I am at peace." She looked up at him. "I carry Emma with me and she will always be part of my story, but you, Xavier, you are my story now. You and our children and our life in Colorado, that is where my heart is." Xavier kissed her forehead gently. "Then let us go home." They returned to the ranch to a joyful reunion with their children and grandchildren. Elijah had managed everything perfectly in their absence, proving he was more than ready to eventually take over full operations. Rosalie had sent a painting she had completed, a landscape of the ranch at sunset that captured the beauty Penelope and Xavier saw every day. Samuel had finished a quilt using scraps from wedding dresses Penelope had made over the years, each square telling a story of love and new beginnings. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythms. Xavier and Penelope spent their days in easy partnership, their love deepened and enriched by decades together. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching sunsets paint the mountains, holding hands like young lovers despite their age. One evening, when Xavier was 68 and Penelope 65, they sat in their usual spot watching the sky turn purple and orange. Penelope had been quieter than usual all day, and Xavier had learned long ago to recognize when something was on her mind. "Talk to me," he said gently, squeezing her hand. Penelope was silent for a moment, then said, "I have been thinking about time, how much we have had together, how much might be left. We are not young anymore, Xavier." "No," he agreed, "we are not. But we are here together, and that is what matters." "Do you have any regrets?" she asked, turning to look at him. About your life, about marrying me, about any of it. Xavier considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. No, he said finally. Not a single one. Everything I have done, every choice I have made led me to you and to this life. How could I regret that, even the waiting? Those first weeks when I was so broken I could barely function, especially the waiting, he said firmly. Penelope, you were worth every moment of patience. You are still worth it. I would wait another lifetime if I had to. She smiled then, that radiant smile that still had the power to make his heart race. You will not have to wait anymore. We are here together, and we will face whatever comes next the same way we have faced everything else. Together, Xavier agreed, pulling her close. They sat that way as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other against unlikely odds and built a love that had lasted decades. They had faced grief and loss, celebrated joy and triumph, raised children and welcomed grandchildren. They had built a life, brick by brick and day by day, until they had created something that would echo through generations. The ranch that Xavier's parents had started, and that Xavier had expanded, would continue through Elijah, and then William and whoever came after. The traditions Penelope had established, the sewing and the stories and the fierce love for family, would pass to Rosalie and Grace, and all the daughters yet to come. The love that Xavier and Penelope had nurtured would ripple outward, touching lives they would never meet, shaping a future they would not see. But for now, in this moment, they simply sat together on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, grateful for every day they had been given. Xavier thought back to that September day so long ago when a woman in mourning black had stepped off a stagecoach and changed his life forever. He had promised to wait, never knowing that waiting would become loving, that loving would become this rich, full life. I love you, he said into the twilight, the words as true now as they had been the first time he spoke them. I love you, Penelope replied, the words a promise and a benediction. Always. The stars wheeled overhead, the mountains stood eternal, and Xavier Lancaster held his wife close, knowing that whatever time they had left would be spent exactly like this. Together in love, grateful for the journey that had brought them here. Years passed in their gentle rhythm, seasons turning like pages in a well-loved book. Xavier and Penelope grew older still, their movements slower, their hair white as winter snow, but their love unwavering. They watched their grandchildren grow and marry, welcomed great-grandchildren with joy and wonder. The ranch continued to prosper under Elijah's capable management, and the family grew and thrived. On a spring morning when Xavier was 74, he woke to find Penelope already up and standing at the bedroom window, looking out at the mountains. The sunrise painted her profile in gold, and for a moment she looked just as she had when she was young, beautiful and strong and full of life. Come back to bed, he said softly. It is early yet. She turned to him with a smile. I was just thinking about all the sunrises we have seen together, all the mornings we have woken up in this room, in this house, on this ranch. It has been a good life, Xavier. The best life, he agreed, holding out his hand to her. Come here. She crossed the room and climbed back into bed beside him, and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling the familiar warmth of her body against his. They had shared this bed for 49 years, had created children in it, had comforted each other through nightmares and illness, had loved and laughed and lived within these walls. 49 years, Penelope murmured, echoing his thoughts. Next year will be 50. We should have a party, Xavier said. A big one with everyone, celebrate properly. I would like that. She snuggled closer. I would like to see everyone together, all the people we have loved, all the family we have built. They planned the party over the following months, sending letters to families scattered across Colorado and beyond. Rosalie and Marcus would come from Boston, where they spent winters now. Samuel and Margaret, who had taken over the sewing business when Penelope retired, would host relatives at their house in town. Elijah and Catherine would help prepare the ranch for the gathering. The golden wedding anniversary party was held on a perfect September day, exactly 50 years after Xavier and Penelope had married in the little church in Breckenridge. The ranch was transformed, decorations hanging from every surface, tables laden with food, a small band playing music in the yard. Family came from far and wide, over 60 people in all, spanning 4 generations. Xavier and Penelope stood at the center of it all, holding hands, overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. Their children spoke, grandchildren performed songs and recited poems, great-grandchildren toddled around creating chaos and laughter. When it was time to cut the cake, Xavier and Penelope's hands trembled as they held the knife together, but their grip was still strong. 50 years ago, Xavier said when called upon to speak, his voice not as strong as it once was but still clear. I made a promise to wait for the woman I loved. That promise has defined my life in ways I never imagined. Penelope, you were worth the wait then, and you have been worth every day since. You took a lonely cowboy and a rundown ranch and turned it into a home, a family, a legacy. Everything I am, everything we have built, exists because you had the courage to step off that stagecoach in your mourning black and give us both a chance at happiness. Penelope was crying, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Xavier taught me that love does not have to be instant to be real. That patience and kindness matter more than passion. That waiting for someone to heal is its own kind of love. He gave me time when I desperately needed it, space to grieve, support to rebuild. And in return, I gave him my heart, my life, my future. It has been the greatest privilege of my life to be his wife. Their family cheered and applauded, and then the music started again and people began to dance. Xavier led Penelope onto the makeshift dance floor, their movements careful now but still in sync after 50 years of partnership. They swayed together under the Colorado sky, surrounded by everyone they loved, and Xavier thought his heart might burst from the fullness of it all. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, their great-grandson Thomas, age 6, tugged on Xavier's pant leg. "Great-grandfather, tell me the story again, about how you met great-grandmother." Xavier smiled and picked up the boy, settling him on his hip despite the strain on his old back. "Well, it was a September day much like this one, 50 years ago. A stagecoach came into town, and the most beautiful woman I had ever seen stepped down. She was wearing black because she was sad, grieving someone she had lost. But I could see past the sadness to the strength underneath. And do you know what I said to her? You said you would wait," Thomas said excitedly, having heard the story many times before. "That is right. I promised I would wait until she was ready, and that promise, that patience, gave us this." Xavier gestured around at the gathering, at the family, at the life they had built. "Sometimes the best things come to those who wait." Thomas considered this seriously, then nodded. "I will remember that, great-grandfather." "Good boy," Xavier said, setting him down and ruffling his hair. As the party wound down and people began to leave, heading to their homes or their hotel rooms in town, Xavier and Penelope stood on their porch one last time, watching the stars emerge. They were exhausted but happy, filled with the warmth of being loved and celebrated. "That was perfect," Penelope said softly. "Everything I could have wanted." "Yes," Xavier agreed, his arm around her waist. "Perfect." They stood there in comfortable silence, and Xavier thought about how far they had come. From that stagecoach arriving in mourning black to this moment of celebration and family. From strangers bound by a practical arrangement to partners who had built a legacy of love. From grief and loneliness to joy and connection. "You remember what you were thinking that day?" Penelope asked. "When you first saw me step down from the stagecoach," Xavier smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen. To travel so far alone while grieving, I thought if I could just earn your trust, we might build something good together." "We did better than good," Penelope said. "We built something extraordinary." They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms as they had for 50 years, and when Xavier closed his eyes he felt nothing but gratitude. For the matrimonial agency that had connected them. For the courage that had brought Penelope west. For the instinct that had told him to wait, to give her time, to let love develop naturally rather than forcing it. For the life they had built together, day by patient day. Xavier lived to be 79, passing peacefully in his sleep with Penelope beside him. His family gathered close. His last words were, "I would wait for you again," whispered to his wife in the quiet of their bedroom as the sun set one final time beyond the mountains he had loved. Penelope lived 3 more years, long enough to see 2 more great-grandchildren born, long enough to finish one last quilt that told the story of their life together in fabric and thread. She died at 82 on a spring morning, slipping away as gently as Xavier had, ready to be reunited with the man who had waited for her, the man who had taught her that love could bloom even in the darkest grief, the man who had given her a life beyond anything she had imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach in mourning black. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the years of their lives. But their real monument was the family that gathered to mourn them, the generations that had sprung from their patient love, the legacy of kindness and dedication and unwavering devotion that they had built together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun painted the mountains gold and purple, the ranch hands swore they could see 2 figures standing on the old porch, holding hands and watching the sunset together. A tall cowboy and the woman in gray who had once worn mourning black, reunited at last, their love story finally complete but never forgotten, echoing through the generations that came after, a testament to the power of patience, the strength of devotion, and the truth that the best things in life are always worth waiting for.